I work with my hands. Always have. 38 years as a plumber in Hamilton, Ontario, and I've got the knuckles to prove it. My father was the same way. Spent his whole life doing pipe fitting and millwright work at the Stelco steel plant on Bayfront, back when that place was the heartbeat of the city. He retired with a bad knee, a decent pension, and more dignity in one calloused palm than most men carry in their entire bodies. His name is Earl. He's 71 now. Still lives in the same house on Cannon Street East where I grew up. Same green aluminum siding. Same cracked driveway where he taught me to change my first set of brake pads on a rusted-out '84 Civic. The house smells like coffee and motor oil and the particular kind of old wood that only comes from a building that's been loved for 50 years. I need you to understand who he is before I tell you what happened. Because what happened, what my son-in-law's family said about my father at Thanksgiving, none of it makes sense unless you know the kind of man they were insulting. My wife passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. We had 18 months from diagnosis to the end, and I'd give everything I own to have 18 more minutes with her. Since then, it's been me and Earl. He comes over on Sundays. We watch the Ticats when they're worth watching, which isn't always. We argue about whether Tim Hortons has gone downhill. He thinks yes. I think it was never that good to begin with. We've been having that argument for 15 years. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is. Every inch of her married a man named Preston 2 years ago. Preston's family is from Oakville. If you're not from Ontario, I'll just tell you that Oakville and Hamilton are about 40 minutes apart on the QEW, but they might as well be different countries sometimes. Oakville is the kind of place where people renovate their kitchens to look like they've never cooked in them. Hamilton is the kind of place where people actually cook. Preston himself is fine. I want to be fair. He works in financial compliance, doesn't say much, laughs at the right moments. He's decent to my daughter, and that covers a lot of ground with me. But his parents, his mother especially, operate on a frequency I've never quite been able to tune into. His mother's name is Constance. She has a way of looking at things that she doesn't approve of the way you'd look at a stain on a tablecloth. Not hostile exactly, just assessing. Always assessing. She asked me once at their engagement party what neighborhood I lived in. When I told her Crown Point, she nodded slowly and said, "Oh, that's still a transitional area, isn't it?" I smiled and let it go. My wife always said I was good at letting things go. She also said I was good at remembering every single thing I'd let go. Thanksgiving this year was supposed to be at my daughter's place. She and Preston bought a semi-detached in West Dale, near McMaster, and she'd been excited about hosting for months. She called me in early September to go over the menu. She called Earl, too. That was my daughter. She always called Earl herself. She didn't leave that to me. She'd ring him up and talk to him about his garden and ask about his tomatoes, and he'd be grinning for the rest of the day. So when I drove over to Earl's place on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I expected him to be in the usual state, pressed shirt already hanging on the door, jar of his chow chow relish wrapped in a tea towel to bring as a gift. He makes his own chow chow from a recipe my mother left behind. It's extraordinary. My daughter asks for a jar every single time she sees him. Instead, he was sitting at his kitchen table in his work pants and a plain gray t-shirt, drinking coffee, looking out the window at the backyard. "You're not dressed," I said. He turned and looked at me. "No. Thanksgiving's tomorrow. You usually start getting ready the night before." "I know when Thanksgiving is," he said, not unkindly. I sat down across from him. The coffee pot was on the table, and I poured myself a cup without asking. That's the kind of house it was. "What's going on?" He was quiet for a moment. Earl is not a man who fills silence with noise. He's the opposite of that. He thinks before he speaks, and sometimes the thinking takes a while. "Your daughter called me last week. Said the dinner was going to be smaller than expected. Said Preston's family wanted something more." He paused, chose his words carefully, intimate. I put my cup down. "She sounded upset when she told me," he said. "I don't think it was her idea. I just think she didn't know how to fight it." I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel. It was a cool evening, the kind of October in Hamilton where the smell of leaves and Lake Ontario iron comes in off the escarpment, and the sky turns that bruised purple-orange color that I've spent my whole life loving without ever finding the right words for it. I wasn't seeing any of it. My daughter was in the kitchen when I got home. She was staying with me for the week to help with the prep, which now apparently meant something different than it had. She looked up when I came in, and I could see it on her face. That particular expression she's had since she was 9 years old, the one that means she already knows why I'm here, and she's already sorry. "Dad," she started. "Tell me," I said. She put down what she was doing and leaned against the counter. "Constance called Preston 2 weeks ago. She said you didn't think the dinner should be two. She used the word mixed, like a mixed crowd would be harder to manage." She stopped, looked at the floor. And then she said that she'd rather not sit next to someone who still smells like a job site. I didn't say anything. She meant Grandpa Earl, my daughter said, even though we both knew she didn't need to clarify. She said his hands make her uncomfortable at the dinner table. That he's lovely, she's sure, but that it wasn't the right setting. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She had tears going, and she wasn't trying to hide them. "I didn't want to tell you," she said. "I didn't want to tell Grandpa Earl. I tried to fix it, and I couldn't fix it." "What did Preston say?" "He said it was just one dinner, and we could see Grandpa Earl after. He said his mother has certain," she made a face, "standards." I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. I had Earl's old push mower out there that he'd given me in the spring when his knee got too bad for the uneven ground. I looked at that mower for a good 30 seconds. "Okay," I said. My daughter looked at me. "Okay. Get your coat. We're going to Earl's." She didn't argue. She never argued when I used that tone, and I want to be clear that I wasn't angry when I said it. I was something past angry, something that had gone all the way around and come out the other side as very, very clear. The way cold water is clear. That kind of clear. We drove to Cannon Street. Earl was still at his kitchen table. My daughter sat down beside him and took his hand and started crying properly, and I watched my 71-year-old father pat her knuckles the same way he used to pat mine when I was small, steady, and slow, not rushed, not awkward, just present. "I already figured out something like that," he said quietly to her. "It's all right, sweetheart." "It's not all right," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't, but you didn't do it, and your dad didn't do it, and that matters to me." I started going to his refrigerator. Earl watched me over his shoulder. "What are you doing?" "Do you have a turkey?" "I've got a 12-pound bird in the freezer, was going to save it. I'll put it in water tonight. It'll be ready by tomorrow afternoon." I found a head of cabbage, a bag of carrots, a container of his chow chow, half a block of old cheddar. I started taking stock. "Do you have sweet potatoes?" "In the pantry, 3 of them." "Good." I opened his pantry. My daughter had stopped crying. She was watching me now. "Dad, what are you doing?" "We're having Thanksgiving here," I said. "The 3 of us. And whoever else from Earl's side wants to come. His neighbor Pete, that woman from the Legion he's friends with, whoever. We'll put the table out in the backyard if we need to." "What about Preston?" I turned around and looked at my daughter. "I want you to understand that I love that kid she married. I truly do. But some moments require more than love." "That's up to Preston," I said. "He knows where his grandfather-in-law lives." She called him that night. I don't know exactly what was said. I sat with Earl in the living room and we watched the tail end of a Blue Jays highlight reel on Sportsnet. And I told him about a difficult job I'd had the week before. A cast-iron main drain on a Victorian house in Dundas. And he asked all the right questions the way he always did, because Earl spent 30 years inside industrial pipes, and he understands plumbing the way other men understand poetry. At some point, he said, without looking at me, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I said. "It was just one dinner." "I know that too." He was quiet. Then your mother would have done the same thing. I didn't say anything to that. Didn't need to. Preston showed up the next day at noon. Just him, not his parents. He had a bag from the LCBO, 2 bottles of a Niagara Peninsula Riesling, and a 6-pack of local craft beer. The kind of thing you bring when you're trying to say something you don't quite know how to say out loud. He stood at Earl's front door with the bag in his hand and said, "I'm sorry, Earl. I should have said something sooner." Earl held the door open wider. "You're here now. Come in." That was it. That was all Earl said. No lecture, no conditions, no list of grievances. Come in. That's who my father is. My daughter's friend Bev came over with her husband and a pot of butternut squash soup. Earl's neighbor Pete brought a pie, apple, slightly lopsided, tasted perfect. The woman from the Legion, a 74-year-old retired nurse named Iris, who Earl has known for a decade, brought homemade dinner rolls in a cloth bag. By 2 in the afternoon, Earl's kitchen smelled the way kitchens are supposed to smell, the way I remember from childhood, like butter and roasting meat, and the particular warmth of a house where people are actually glad to be together. We pushed 2 tables together in the backyard because the weather held, that rare warm Thanksgiving afternoon that Ontario gives you maybe once every 5 years. The leaves were at their peak on Cannon Street, the old maples my father planted 30 years ago, which are now taller than his house, going full red and gold against a blue sky. We ate outside under those trees. Earl sat at the head of the table. He was wearing his good plaid shirt, the dark blue one my wife bought him years ago that he saves for occasions. His hands were around a glass of that Niagara Riesling, and his face had that expression he sometimes gets, not quite smiling, something quieter than smiling, that I've been trying my whole life to earn the right to carry. After the meal, when the dishes were starting to pile up and Pete was telling a story about his brother-in-law that had everyone laughing, Earl leaned over to me and said quietly, "This is a good table." "Yeah," I said, "it is." "It's because of who's around it," he said. "Not where it is, not what it looks like." He looked down at his own hands, those big calloused hands that built things and fixed things and held me when I was small. "They can say what they want about these. These hands put you through your Red Seal apprenticeship. These hands helped your mother through her last winter. I know what they are." I couldn't speak for a moment. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I managed. "I'm good." He patted my arm once, the same way he patted my daughter's knuckles the night before. Steady and unhurried. Then he picked up his wine and went back to Pete's story. I heard later from my daughter what happened at Constance's Thanksgiving. It was apparently very clean and very quiet and perfectly arranged. The table linens were ironed. The conversation stayed on approved topics. There were no lopsided pies and no surplus of voices talking over each other and no children chasing a dog between the chairs because Pete inexplicably brought his terrier and no one told him not to. I'm sure it was all very proper. Constance called Preston that weekend, my daughter told me, asked why he'd left early. He told her he'd gone to be with his wife's family. She apparently had a lot to say about that. I don't know the exact words. What I do know is that Preston told her quietly and firmly that Earl was his family now, too, and that was the end of the conversation. I don't know what will happen going forward with Constance. These things take time. Some people learn, some people entrench, and you can't always tell which kind you're dealing with until a few more years have gone by. What I know is that Preston stood up when it counted. Late but not too late, and in my experience, that is how most people find their footing. Not all at once, but step by step, once they realize what they actually value. I think about that table on Cannon Street a lot since then. Those old maple trees going red in the late afternoon. The lopsided pie. Iris's dinner rolls still warm from the cloth bag. My father's hands around his glass. There's a thing I've come to believe. At 63, after burying a wife and raising a daughter and spending 4 decades crawling into the spaces behind walls and underfloors that other people never see, the unglamorous architecture of how buildings actually work, I've come to believe that the measure of a man is not in the softness of his hands or the shine of his car, or whether he knows which fork is for the salad. It's in whether people come to his table, whether they stay, whether they go home feeling like something was given to them rather than taken. Every Thanksgiving since my wife died, I've had moments of feeling her absence like a physical thing, a space at the table that doesn't fill no matter how many people you put around it. This year was the first year I felt something different. Not less grief. I don't think that goes anywhere, but alongside it, something that felt like the other side of the same coin, like fullness. That's what my father's table gave us. That's what it's always given me since I was small enough to sit at it, with my feet not touching the floor, watching his hands move through work and food and life with the same unhurried certainty. You don't replace that. You don't upgrade from it. You carry it with you, and if you're lucky, you build a table of your own that carries it forward. I've been thinking about Constance's table a lot since that Thanksgiving. The ironed linens, the approved topics, the careful quiet of a room where nothing spills and nothing surprises and nothing costs anyone anything real. I don't say that with contempt. I say it with something closer to sadness because I think that kind of table is its own punishment. When you spend your energy keeping things clean instead of keeping them honest, you end up alone in a room that looks perfect and feels like nothing at all. What happened between Constance and Preston that weekend wasn't an accident. It was the result of choices that had been building for a long time on both sides. Constance made hers. She decided that a man's worth could be measured by the softness of his hands, that a table was something to be protected rather than shared. And that choice produced exactly what choices like that always produce, a son who eventually had to decide what he actually believed, standing at someone else's door with 2 bottles of wine and an apology that was long overdue. Preston made his choice too, late, yes, but he made it. And I've learned at 63 that late is not the same as never. There's a kind of courage that doesn't arrive on schedule. It arrives when the cost of staying quiet finally outweighs the cost of speaking. Preston found that point. I respect him for it. Earl didn't do anything dramatic. He didn't demand an apology. He didn't keep score. He opened the door wider and said, "Come in." And that single gesture is the thing I keep coming back to, because it takes a particular kind of clarity to respond to being diminished with generosity instead of hardness. That clarity doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a man who spent 40 years knowing exactly what his work meant, knowing what his hands built and fixed and held, and never once needing someone else to confirm it for him. That's what I want to carry forward, not the anger at what Constance said. Anger is easy, and it's cheap, and it burns through you fast and leaves nothing useful behind. What I want to carry is what Earl modeled at that table, the steadiness to know your own value so completely that other people's assessments of you stop having so much power. That's not arrogance. That's a man who did the quiet work of building a life with integrity day after day, year after year, until the foundation was solid enough that no one's opinion could shake it. My daughter saw all of it. She's 31 years old, and she was watching her grandfather that day the same way I used to watch him when I was small. Like someone trying to memorize a lesson they know they're going to need. I hope she takes it in. I hope she understands that the strength it takes to stay dignified when you've been insulted, the wisdom to know which fights to pick and which tables to leave and which doors to open anyway. Those things are not given to you. You build them. The same way Earl built everything else, one day at a time, with your hands in the unglamorous work of just showing up. That's the table we're sitting at, not the one with the ironed linens. The one where someone pulled a chair out for you and meant it.